Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you're listening from. My name is Amy Burden, and I'm an English language specialist with the U.S. Department of State. And I'll be delivering this webinar today, Communicating Creatively, using multimodal assessments to guide your students' language development. So let's get going. Where are you listening from? Let me know who you are and where you are right now in the chat. Introduce yourself. Tell us where you're joining from. While you're doing that, I'll tell you a little bit about me. So my name is Amy Burden. I have a PhD in Applied Linguistics from the University of Memphis. I currently work at the Center for Applied Linguistics in Washington, D.C., and in USA. And the center picture is a picture of my team that I work with at the Center for Applied Linguistics. On the side is a picture of my family. So it is great to meet you. I see Chiclayo, Peru. Wonderful. That's exciting to have people from Bolivia, Peru, Costa Rica. Hola to Carrie. Daniel, Peace Corps. Wonderful. Costa Rica. That's exciting. I'm so glad you all are tuning in today. This is my first webinar with RELO Andes, and I'm really excited to be here. Rabia from Algeria, wonderful. I'm so glad you're here. I want to remind you all that this webinar series through RELO Andes happens every month on the third Thursday, 2 p.m. Lima, Peru time. You are all invited. You do not have to live in Peru. You do not have to live in the Andes region in order to be a part. I look forward to being with you every month for the next few months and giving webinars on topics that I think and I hope will inspire you to be creative and innovative teachers. All right, so let's think about what we are doing today. Today's topics. First, we'll look at the term multimodality. What is multimodality and why does multimodality matter? And then we'll look at how we can use multimodality to make our test instructions easier to understand, and how we can learn more from our students about what they know and can do. Now, I underlined the word understand because I know that sometimes when we hear make our test easier, that's not what we want. We want to make our test fair. So when I say easier to understand, I mean the instructions are clear. Our students understand what they're supposed to do. That way, there's nothing standing between them and their ability to show us what they know and can do on that test. So we'll look at multimodality, why it matters, and how we can use it. If you're interested in learning more about using multimodality in the language classroom, after this webinar, you can hop over to English Teaching Forum, Volume 60, Number 1. We'll share the link in the chat so that you can take a look at this issue of English Teaching Forum, which has several articles about using multimodality in your classroom. So I hope you'll check it out after the webinar. It's a really great resource. So let's get started. What is multimodality? So multimodality just means more than one mode or way of communicating. There's a chart on the screen that shows there are 5 different ways or modes of communication. There's visual, which is the red, oral is green, gestural is a light blue, spatial is orange, linguistic is a dark blue. So gestural, what's the gestural mode? I provided an example there. The gestural mode involves body language. This person is giving a peace sign. It also involves facial expressions. So they're kind of doing the duck face is what we call it in the US. to take a cell phone picture. So anything that has to do with your body language, your facial expressions. So in the classroom, this could be like hand motions to go with a song. It could be total physical response or TPR. The oral mode is anything having to do with your hearing or your listening. So this could be music, it could be noises, it could be any kind of sound. It could also be listening to someone speak. Anything that you listen to is part of the oral mode. Next is the linguistic mode. This is anything having to do with language. We mostly see language in its written form. So reading and writing are the linguistic mode. This can be language, any language, and it can also be different symbols. So, when you think of the symbols that you see on signs, they communicate using the linguistic mode. But even if they might not use letters. Next is the visual mode. And so that's anything that you see. So this can be a photograph, a drawing, it could be a movie, anything that you see is part of the visual mode. And the last mode is the spatial mode. This is how people, when they're drawing or painting, will make something look closer or further away. They'll make something look bigger or smaller, or they'll move the directions, facing one way or another, facing backwards or forwards, looking up, looking down. That's the spatial mode. So when you use more than one mode of communication at a time, like when you are like the person at the top who's using the gestural mode to send a picture, which is the visual mode, that is multimodality, using more than one mode at a time to communicate. Okay, so I guess the next question to ask, though, is why, as language teachers, do we care? Why does multimodality matter to us as language teachers? Well, first, meaning making or making meaning is multimodal. Speech and writing are only part of the ways that we make meaning, especially now that we are in the digital age and everything is online. You can read anything online, you can see anything online, and those all combine or use multiple modes to make meaning, to get your meaning across. Even right now, I'm using multiple modes. I'm using gestures, I'm using facial expressions, I'm using my voice, and I'm using a slideshow to make meaning. So that's one reason that multimodality matters to language teachers. But a second is that using multiple modes to communicate with our students helps them to better understand maybe complicated or complex topics or tasks, or multiple step instructions. It makes it easier for them to understand when we use multiple modes to communicate. Using multiple modes for students to respond to you also makes that student response more fair and more equitable for those students. It supports a universal design for learning called UDL. It communicates concepts, ideas in the most effective way and makes sure that everyone gets exactly what they need. So, for example, using text, like I'm doing on the screen, and audio supports reading and hearing. Using images, like the picture I have, And animation can help to focus your attention. And using many examples can increase your understanding. So those are some of the ways that multimodality matters to us as language teachers. Using more than one mode for students to respond to a task helps students share more of what they know. That's another reason that multimodality matters. Okay, so let's think about the different ways that we can use multimodality on our tests. We can take a few examples from these high stakes language tests. So I've got a few of them here. Lots of large scale language tests use multimodality. So for example, the IELTS test uses graphs like the one shown here. The MET and the TOEFL test uses a lot of pictures. The advanced writing test uses video and audio. And the IELTS test also uses maps. So these are all examples of ways that large-scale language tests give us multimodal, or more than one mode, of input on a test. I used to develop tests for the MET, for the Michigan English test at the University of Michigan. And some of the ways that we used multimodal input were to have a video like this one read the instructions. Another way that we use multimodality is to have audio read the answer choices, or to have pictures and the student reads a sentence and chooses the picture that describes the sentence. So these are some ways that these high stakes or large scale language tests use multimodal input. I see that there's some conversation going on in the chat, so I want to turn it over to y'all. See if I can do that. What about you? Have you taken a large scale test that used multimodal input? Pictures, videos, charts, graphs, maps. Write it in the chat. What modes have the tests you've taken used? Put that in the chat as well. Wow, I'm looking at the chat now. We've got a lot of people from all over the world. How exciting. From Rome, Tanzania. Santi says, we can say that using multimodality helps learners understand audio since they are very difficult. Yes, absolutely. Learners can use it to have ideas of what the message will be. That's a really good point. Wala says that incorporating multimodality into your teaching can make your lessons more dynamic and effective, catering to the diverse needs and interests of your student while fostering a love for learning. Very well said. You need to lead these. That was great. ECCE. Yes, I worked on ECCE. FCE and TOEFL, ITP. Very true. Thank you, Lourdes, for sharing those tests. All right. I'm trying to remember, I took the GRE and the ACT, and I think both of those tests use a lot of pictures. But I don't remember them using much audio or video. All right, so after we've considered how these large-scale tests use multimodality, let's think about how we can incorporate more multimodality into the design of our tests. So this is the ways that we can share information with our students using multimodality. So first, one way that we can use multimodality is to read instructions out loud. So if we give our students a test on paper and the instructions are written at the top, reading those instructions out loud uses two modes of communication, the oral mode and the linguistic mode. Secondly, we can show pictures with our instructions. When I was teaching a level 1 class, I would put a picture of a book underneath the word read. I would put a picture of a pencil underneath the word write. This helped my students learn those words very quickly because they had the word and the picture to go with it. And it helped them while they were still learning to understand more of what I was asking them to do. You can give examples of what the work should look like. So this can be as simple as several sample sentences that you read with the class to show them examples of what their sentences should look like. It could be a completed project for your more advanced students, showing them multiple completed assignments, essays, paragraphs, whatever you're wanting them to produce on that assessment. Give them more than one example and show them what makes it good. That way they can better match what they see. You can also use gestures and facial expressions while you are reading or speaking to your students about the assessment. So when I taught, especially when I taught level 1 and level 2 students, I felt like a cheerleader. I felt like a circus clown, and I felt like a mime. I was moving around the classroom constantly. I was showing them that they needed to read. I was telling them to look at something. I was showing them the different verbs like run, look for. I was doing facial expressions when we were learning emotions. I was constantly moving to use those gestures and facial expressions to help them understand what we were about to do. We would talk, get in groups and talk to each other. Those were some ways that I would use gestures and facial expressions to help them better understand the instructions. You can also use different colors. You can use highlighting and you can use underlining to increase the multimodality with that linguistic mode. So different colors. For example, you could put something in red to tell students to stop where they are after they get to the end. Stop here. You can highlight things that you know your students are going to forget to do to make certain they go back and do it. You can underline important parts of the instructions so that students see those clearly and understand just how important they are. I love the use of emojis in this. This is great. Y'all are making me smile with all these emojis that you're putting in the chat. So these are some ways that you can use multimodal input in your assessments to make them more fair and equitable and make certain that everyone understands what's being asked of them. So here's some examples from language teachers in the field. In 2021, I gave a workshop in the Philippines to educators who taught first grade through 12th grade. And in that workshop, everyone designed multimodal assessments. And these are some multimodal assessments that those teachers designed that are good examples of using multiple modes to help students understand what's going on. So for example, the first is an activity where students should write a title for the story. And the arrows that go with the pictures help the students see the flow of the story from beginning to end. Each box helps students understand where they're supposed to write. And the boxes at the very bottom help students understand the kinds of information and where it needs to go. The second example is from a high school class. This teacher wanted students to write the effect of the cause of the given cause. And this teacher used boxes and arrows to help students understand where they're supposed to write, what they're supposed to write, and help them understand that what happened first goes here, what happened second goes here. So mixing up the colors and the use of arrows and language helped the students better understand what was expected of them. This is a video instruction that I thought was really interesting for an ABC activity. So in the ABC activity, you can see where the teacher asked students to put examples of each letter of the alphabet. And the teacher combined pictures and letters and made it into a video. So it was a little more fun for the students to go through the ABC activity and understand what they're supposed to do. So I'd like to ask you about the tools that you use to make your assignments and your assessments multimodal. All three of the examples that I showed you from educators in my workshop were made on canva.com. Have you ever used canva.com to create assessments or assignments? Can you give a thumbs up in the chat if you have used Canva, or a thumbs down if you have not? And please share what tools you use to make your assessments multimodal. Oh, cool. Yolanda's used Canva before. And we've also shared a link to Canva. Educators can use Canva for free. So all you need is a school email address, and you can begin to use Canva for free. Yolanda says that she's used Canva for infographics and portfolios. Santi says Kahoot and quizzes. Absolutely. Those are great tools for multimodal assessments. Carmen has not used Canva before. I hope you'll take a look next time you're online. Lourdes says that Canva is great. I really enjoy it too. I make a lot of my presentations for work in Canva. I make videos for work in Canva. Geo, yes, Paint is a great tool on the go. I agree. It's very simple, but it gets the job done. I understand that. All right. Thanks, everyone, for sharing your feedback on these online tools, these digital tools for making multimodal assessments. We've got some good ideas here. Kahoot, quizzes, Paint, Canva, and using those to make infographics and portfolios. Those are some great ideas. Thanks, everyone, for sharing. Live worksheet, Claudia says. That's another good tool. I have not checked that one out, but I will. Thank you for sharing that. Okay, so we've talked about how we can make our assessments multimodal so that our students better understand the instructions, and we're making it more fair and equitable for all of our students. But what about student responses? How can we help our students to respond multimodally. Because remember, when students can use more than one mode to communicate with us, they can better share, they can share more of what they know and can do. So I've got a couple of ideas here on the screen. The first is creating blogs. This is a picture of the blog spot. You can use videos, pictures, audio, and words. You can change the color and the size of words to get multiple modalities. So having your students do their writing assignments somewhere like Blogspot is a great way to use multimodal writing. But if your students don't have access to a computer, that's okay. You can do a lot of multimodal writing right in your notebook. So my second picture is a picture of an interactive notebook. This is where students create little flaps, little pieces of paper that they can move back and forth. And so here a student has written the definitions to some keywords and has glued the keyword on top. So the student is showing their understanding of the definitions of these keywords, and it helps the student study for using these keywords later on in a lesson. So you can make an interactive notebook or ask your students to make an interactive notebook. Another thing that you can do is an infographic. I think it was Yolanda who mentioned making infographics. What a great idea. Infographics is this third picture. And students can design this on a sheet of paper, or they can design this on a computer. But for any assignment where you're asking your students to maybe show a step-by-step process, like a recipe, or how to make something, or how to do something, or even to talk about their schedule, you can have them design it in an infographic where it's step one and a picture, maybe some arrows connecting the steps to one another. They can also present infographics for any number of ideas or information. All you have to do is Google infographic and you'll get tons of ideas. But students can do this on paper or digitally. And then the last picture is a student who created a comic strip on a couple of sheets of printer paper, of white paper. So the student can draw their own pictures and write what's going on underneath the picture and create multimodal writing that way as well. Kind of like a scrapbook. Absolutely. Yeah. I started using the interactive notebooks during the pandemic, and I think they did pretty well. So yeah, thanks for sharing that. Old school Canva, 100%. So that gets writing and other modes. What about speaking and other modes? So some ideas for using multimodal speaking. The first one is a vlog or a podcast. So this is where students could record themselves speaking. They could add music, they could add sound effects, and get multiple modes going. So they're reading what they've written, they're adding in music and sound effects. Students could also make their own videos using a cell phone camera or a webcam. This could be something as simple as, students are in groups talking and they press record and get everybody's ideas on camera and then submit it to you. Or it could be as complicated or complex as meeting after school and making a commercial together. It doesn't have to be digital, though. If your students don't have access to that kind of technology, something as simple as a conversation with you or with each other that you can listen in on gets multiple modes. So in this last picture, a student has written something and has turned to a teacher to talk about what they've written. There's a kind of questioning called dynamic assessment. This is basically asking students how, why, tell me more, what do you mean by? So it's taking that student work that is maybe writing, or a picture, and it's asking open questions to get more information from the students. You can, and if you have a large class, you can teach your students to do that for you and get that information, and then you can walk around and listen into those conversations. So here are some examples from the field. Again, so this is from I believe, a 5th grade classroom in the United States. This is a student who speaks Spanish at home and is learning to speak English at school. And the teacher gave the class bags with different objects in them and told them to sort the objects any way they wanted in their small group, and then to answer these questions here based on what they chose to do, how they sorted the objects. So you can see that one student combined pictures and lines on the page and words and letters to explain how they sorted the objects. Then the student used words and bullet points and numbers and spacing, equal signs, in order to give more information about how they sorted the objects. Finally, the student wrote a paragraph to answer all 3 of these questions. Let's see. So Walla has in the chat, oral presentations, students can verbally explain concepts, share their thoughts, encourage them to use gestures, tone of voice, and body language. That's such a great idea. So it can be something simple like recording a conversation, but the more you encourage your students to use those modalities, the more you learn from them about what they know. Here's another example. This is from that same classroom. So again, this is a 5th grade student who speaks Spanish at home and is learning English at school. In this activity, the teacher put some food and some plastic and paper into 2 jars. She closed the lid on one jar and she left the lid open on another jar and then set them in the window for a week. After a week, she set the 2 jars on a table and asked the students to compare the 2 jars any way they wanted. They could write, they could draw, but they had to compare the 2 jars. And so this student used pictures to show that the smell from the open jar was coming out of the jar, but the smell from the closed jar was trapped inside. And to draw what the jars looked like, how they looked differently. The student then labeled all their drawings with words and gave each jar a title. This is from my classroom. I taught a writing class at the University of Memphis, and my students had created a 5-paragraph essay about something that was important to them. And then I asked them to make that 5-paragraph essay multimodal. So to kind of do it again and add in new modalities. So this student wrote an essay about a club called Junior ROTC. It's a military club that students can join when they're in high school. It focuses on health and fitness, character development, and this student participated and really enjoyed it. So she made her essay all about how helpful Junior ROTC is. When it was time to make it multimodal, she made a pamphlet, a trifold or a 3-fold pamphlet full of pictures and graphs and the keywords from her essay. So how do you get started with multimodal assessments? Or if you're already using multimodal assessments in your classroom, how do you go a little further? So my suggestion, if you're just getting started, is to pick one assignment. You don't have to redo everything in your classroom just to use multimodality. You can choose one assignment and add in some multimodal elements. Whatever assignment you choose to make multimodal, think through that final product before you start changing things. What does the finished product look like? What are some ideas for how this should look when students get done? Then you should consider what your students already know and can do. So if you're in a classroom where your students are on social media a lot, they all have cell phones, or they have tablets, or they have access to the internet, and they're pretty comfortable using emojis and typing on a keyboard, then maybe introducing a blog or a website or a podcast is something that those students are ready for. If you're working with students who do not have regular access to cell phones and technology, but they're used to using markers and crayons to draw and express themselves, then maybe adding drawing to your next writing assignment is a good way to add multimodality. I would also think about what your students' needs are. If you have students who have visual impairments, how can you add multimodality to make your tests more fair and equitable to those students? Or if you have students who have low literacy, meaning their reading skills are quite low, but their speaking and listening skills are higher, then you can add in reading the instructions out loud, or add pictures to your instructions to make certain your students understand the instructions on an assignment. This is really important if you want to test students' listening ability. If students have good listening ability but have trouble reading and writing, you may not learn how much they know about the listening skill if the only way they can share that information with you is by reading and writing. So this is a way that you can consider multimodality to test, for example, listening. You might also consider re-presenting another assignment. So going back to this one, my student got a grade for her 5-paragraph essay. Then I re-presented the assignment and asked her to do it again multimodally. And she got a 2nd grade for doing this assignment multimodally. So that's another idea, is to have them do the assignment twice, give them 2 grades. You definitely want to give lots of examples, especially for something like this, the pamphlet that my college student did, but also for activities that you do with very young learners. If you want them to draw a picture or move pieces of paper to match one another on their desk, showing them what to do, showing them how it should look when they get done, showing them more than once is going to make certain that they understand the instructions before they get started. It also will show them what you expect from them. They'll be better able to meet your expectations if they understand what that looks like, what it sounds like. And you want to teach students how to do it before asking them to do it alone. So if you're working with young learners and you want them to cut out paper to make an interactive notebook, be sure their scissors skills are where they need to be to cut out paper by themselves. If it's not, then you need to teach scissors skills before the multimodal assignment. If you're working with older learners and you want them to record a conversation, make certain they know how to use the recording app or the recording device before you leave them to make their assignment. You can also break a task down into smaller parts. So if it's a big project like that pamphlet that my student did, making 5 or 10-minute activities with your students in class, where maybe today we're going to pick out some pictures. Tomorrow, we're going to go through that essay and we're going to highlight the key points. The next day, we're going to choose a outline or a particular kind of pamphlet to get started. So make it small and easy to manage. And you can give your students grades for each part of that process as well. That will award them for the work they're putting in. Check in with students while they work, like the teacher on this video. Be sure that you check in with them often and use their multimodal expressions to help you figure out what's going on. If they look confused, they're probably confused. If they look like they're confident and they're enjoying their work, they probably are. So use their multimodal expressions to guide you and how you check in with them. And finally, I suggest giving students a choice in how they express themselves. Some students will love using anything that has to do with their cell phone in the classroom. Some students are much more comfortable with pen and paper. Some students love to draw and some students hate it. So giving students a choice in how they finish a project or how they finish a multimodal assessment is going to make them more comfortable, more confident. And when they're comfortable and confident, they're doing a better job of showing you what they know and can do. So multimodal learning is not just for your students, and it's not just for you to add to your tests. You can learn multimodally as well. Just like using multiple modes of communication helps your learners understand more, receiving multimodal responses from your students will help you understand more about what your learners know and can do with the topic or the skill that you're assessing. When our learners have a chance to write and discuss, or make something and write something, or any other combination of these modes of communication, we get to see, we get to hear, and we get to learn a little more about what skills they've mastered, what skills, and where maybe there's still some confusion, so that we can step in and make changes. With the increase, we learn more from our students, right? And so when we receive these multimodal responses, we can better plan our next steps for instruction. Maybe you learn from a multimodal response that something needs to be retaught. Maybe students are not getting it. Maybe you just need to use simpler language and give the instructions again. Maybe your students have truly mastered this skill and you are confident that they're ready to move on. When we learn from our students' multimodal responses, we can plan for the future with more confidence. So, what about you? Drop an emoji or 2 or 3 in the chat. Share your thoughts on using multimodal assessments in your classroom. How do you feel about it? How likely are you to use multimodal assessments in your classroom? Do you already use multimodal assessments in your classroom? Let me know what you think. Share an emoji in the comments and let me know your thoughts on using multimodal assessments. Some smiley faces from Santi. Thank you. Wala says that, frankly speaking, multimodality is a flexible approach to communication and learning that can benefit a wide range of individuals. However, it is important to recognize that not every person will have the same preferences or needs when it comes to multimodal experiences. So true. This is where it's really important to get to know your students and get to know how they learn and what they need. Got some smiley faces with stars in their eyes. Got some 100% to the top from Geo. Wala has the strong arms. I love this use of emojis. Dalton's got a nice mix of emojis. We got stars, we got smile, we got sunglasses, and regular glasses. Very cool. Awesome. While you guys are putting those emojis in the chat and sharing your thoughts on multimodal assessments, I want to tell you about our post-webinar discussion tomorrow. So tomorrow is at 2 p.m. Lima, Peru time. We will have a post-webinar discussion. I would like for these post-webinar discussions to take the format of a professional learning community. So what is a professional learning community? A professional learning community is a place where we can, where people who have shared values and vision can be creative together, can share our personal practices with one another, where we're all supported as educators, and where we have shared supportive leadership. So if you would like to be a part of the RELO Andes professional learning community, please check in on Zoom. The link is shared on the RELO Andes Facebook page. Please check in on Zoom tomorrow at 2 p.m. Lima time to be a part of this supportive community of people who have shared values and missions who are being creative together. We'll talk about multimodal assessments and take it a little further. How do you grade a multimodal assessment? What I'd like for you to do is post your questions about multimodal assessments as comments on the Facebook link to the post-webinar discussion for tomorrow. And you can even bring some sample assessments with you, some examples for how you grade multimodal assessments, or just your own ideas, and come and share your personal practice tomorrow at 2 p.m. Lima time. I need your feedback. I am new here and I want to get to know you better. So I've created a survey that is being posted in the chat and on the RELO Andes Facebook page. I'd like to hear from you about topics you'd like to learn more about. And I also want your advice and your opinions on how we can make these Friday discussions, the post-webinar discussions, more effective and productive and useful for you. So please fill out the survey either now or come back to it later on the RELO Andes Facebook page and give me your thoughts on future topics that you'd like to learn about in our RELO Andes webinar series. Also, give me your opinions and advice on how to make those Friday discussions really useful for the most people. All right. Thanks, everyone, so much for attending today's RELO Andes webinar. Thank you for being so interactive in the chat and for sharing so many of your ideas, new techniques. Thank you so much for being a part of today's RELO Andes webinar series. I am Amy Burden, English Language Specialist. Thank you.